Hello, it's Doris with Aldi Books, and I'm here to talk about the April Book Naturalist Book Club pick, which was Call of the Reed Warbler, A New Agriculture, A New Earth by Charles Massey. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, this book has had like a mind-blowing effect on me. I'm feeling like there's a paradigm shift going on in my thinking from reading this book. Just absolutely, there are so many thoughts swirling around in my head that I don't think I can do them justice, but I'm going to try to give you a few of them. I even made notes. Oh my goodness. So this is our book club pick. We chose it because we were looking for a title for April, for Aussie April. So I like to read Australian picks every year in April, and this is the one that we could find that was readily available. Heidi has an excellent book review up of this book, very comprehensive. So I will definitely link that below. I think I'm just going to go with my swirling thoughts here. So watch hers if you want a comprehensive review. I will say that this is definitely readable, but it is also definitely 450 pages long and quite academic. So Charles Massey is an Australian farmer and herdsman. I don't know the term for rancher, keeping sheep, yes, and cattle. And, family business. He it actually had to leave university and come back and help the family farm when his father became ill. So then he finished his first degree part-time while working on the ranch with his dad. And then he went back based on experiences and real life interactions with others, his own paradigm shift. He ended up going back to university in his late 50s to get a PhD. And so this is kind of what came out of his research, just a more fleshed out version of it. And I will say that he bases a lot of his thinking on another researcher in the field, Allan Savory. So I found TED Talks for both of these gentlemen, so I'll list those below because, again, this book is very niche. So there aren't going to be many of you running out to read this book, but the things that it covers, I think so many of us need to hear. I mean, I needed to hear them, and it's just like so many of them I knew already, some I did not, but the way the thoughts come together, it really drives it home and makes you realize how big a deal this is. So the book is about something that he's termed regenerative agriculture, and it's a way of farming and ranching that puts the focus back on earth and the dynamics of how everything is interrelated, and away from industrialized agriculture, which is killing our planet. Oh my goodness. So regenerative agriculture has 5 branches, 5 focus areas. And I think the first 4 are from Allan Savory, and the last one is the one that Charles Massey has added and did his PhD research on. So these 5 are the solar energy function. So this is ways to maximize photosynthesis and trap some of that carbon in our atmosphere back into the earth in a holistic natural way. And the methods that he's come up with to do this are so doable and economically feasible. And it's just a big fat lie that we can't feed our planet with natural resources, that we need big pharma to do it. We don't. We totally can do this with natural methods that feed the earth and nurture it. Oh. Number 2 is the water cycle, ways to conserve rainfall and work with our resources so that dry areas can still produce and produce well, even during periods of drought. 3 is the soil mineral cycle. And this one is where we need to do our part. Like, quit buying the Roundup. I'm talking to you. Stop. Don't buy the Roundup anymore. I personally have had a problem with that for years. Like, I don't feel good about Roundup. Glyphosate is the, non-name brand term for this, but industrial agriculture, we just went into it, just dove in head first when, back in the 70s during the Green Revolution, and we didn't know the whole story. So we are basically currently, we're feeding our soils the synthesized nitrogen and phosphate, etc., and we're debilitating our plants. We're genetically altering them so that they'll produce what we want them to produce, but they're no longer able to live in the wild the way we need them to. So then we dump these glyphosates and weed killers. We're dumping weed killers and fungicides and pest killers and killers. They're all killers. We are poisoning the earth with them. But these genetically modified plants and the monocultures that we're creating have to have them to survive. So it's basically, you can equate it to the big pharma Oxycontin epidemic that we've also created in our world. But the plants are on drugs and they can't function without them is basically what's going on here. But the thing that we didn't know when we started dumping all of these synthetics on the soil is that we've got this whole microbiome going on in the soil. Like, we think the soil is just this tool and we can modify it to our purposes. But the soil is a living being. It's full of earthworms and badgers and all these little creatures, but even more, it's full of microbacteria, fungus, all of these living things. This whole biomass that's bigger than all the things you see, and it's critical to our survival. If you've read a book that I highly recommend, you will all enjoy this, definitely. It's called I Contain Multitudes by Ed Yong, and this book blew my mind. We are living in a mutualistic environment within ourselves. We are not just who we are full of microorganisms that we need to survive. We are slam full of these microorganisms. I highly recommend that you read I Contain Multitudes by Ed Yong. I will list all of these books below that I mentioned so that you can look them up, but it's written in such an engaging manner. It read to me like the old Mutual of Omaha Wild Kingdom from, when I was a child. It's just so engaging, but mind-blowing as well, all about these organisms and what they do for us and how they function. But the soil is the same thing. the soil is full of these microorganisms as well, and it's all connected. It's a synergistic function. These microorganisms in the soil, not only do they make the plants function optimally, but we ingest them and they make us function optimally, and we're breaking the cycle. Oh, we need to get back to nature, okay? So the fourth one is the dynamic ecosystem. So all of this interrelatedness, the insects and the birds and the small mammals, and how in a dynamic ecosystem, they all work together to keep everything under control and working well. And these huge monocultures that we've created, they don't have this. They don't have the microbiome functioning, and they don't have the insects and birds and whatnot to keep, the other insects under control that will eat our crop, and thus we have to put, Roundup and bug killers and all that jazz all over the place and poison the earth and ourselves. Let's admit it. So the other thing that really just blew my mind is, like, I didn't know tilling the soil was detrimental, and it is. Yes, we do need to get air for the nitrogen fixation into the soil. And yes, we do need to keep weeds under control. But we have all of these other methods that we can do that now that we know. This is just tangential, just talking about the things I didn't know. But the one that really blew my mind as well was I had read Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe and Fire Country by Victor Steffenson. And both of these were written by Indigenous Australian gentlemen. And they're talking about fire stick farming. So the native culture for eons, developmentally in human evolution, developed this technique in Australia to do this mosaic burning, cool burning that was beneficial to the environment for diversity and for the drought seasons and for herding, all of these things. And it's just fascinating reading. And they mentioned this as well in Call of the Reed Warbler about how important it is. Why didn't the European colonizers listen to the people who lived there and knew, and instead we just destroyed their culture, destroyed their environment, but when I was reading these books, another thing I never knew was Australia didn't have any hooved animals. And so when the European settlers came with all of these herds and kind of destroyed the soil, because the Australian soil was not adapted for hooved animals and the pressure. And so, yeah, that made sense to me. It totally did. But reading Call of the Reed Warbler, they're like, wait a minute, not so fast. So they have developed this is, one of the systems that they've developed for this regenerative agriculture. But it's a system of smaller paddocks to run the sheep through so that the land can rest for longer periods of time. And it's based on African wild herding, so with the big predators, the big game predators, the lions and the tigers and the bears. I don't know if they're bears in Africa, but I'm being funny. But the herds, they didn't have time to settle in one place for, the whole year or 6 months or whatever. They were constantly on the go. So they didn't do the kind of damage that long-term area herding does. So this regenerative agriculture has created these they're not micro paddocks, but you know, they've divided the land into much smaller areas so they can constantly rotate the herd. So it might be in one area for, you know, I don't know, 2 weeks. I'm just making this number up to illustrate a point. And then that land can lie fallow for 10 weeks. So the problems were like, yes, the hoofed animals do compact the soil if they're allowed to be on there for, you know, a great length of time. And they do preferential grazing, which depletes the perennial grasses, which are much tastier apparently. So the perennial grasses are the long-term grasses that keep growing from year to year and sink those really deep roots down. And then that just like desiccates the soil. It leaves it bald because the short term, the annual grasses that come back every year, they're short term. They don't stay all year long. Their roots come back year after year, so they have more shallow roots. So you can see where it just leaves the land bald for a greater amount of time. So number one, you don't have the degree of photosynthesis that's optimal. And two, you leave the area without roots. It's more open to erosion from wind and rain. You know, it's just devastating for the soil. So another point, and Heidi made this so well in her video, is that we're kind of stuck where we are. We're not stuck. That's not what we can progress, but we can't go back to what we were. So colonization happened, and we have changed the environment, and these herd animals are there now. But this is not necessarily a bad thing. They have developed methods to actually regenerate and improve and enrich the soil through herding. So all of that animal poop and the brief disruption of the soil is actually good for stirring it up and, you know, getting it going. So yeah, I mean, it's just mind-blowing. All of these methods, like if you're into farming, maybe, but all of these methods that they've come up with, and it actually is one of the answers to climate change and global warming. And it's just like, oh, like it gave me hope, you know, it gave me hope. So another thing I'm committed to now after reading this book is organic food. Like I always knew it was healthy, but it never, all of these pieces have fallen into place, and I need to, as much as possible, buy organic food to support these farmers that are doing the right thing, and are on the cutting edge of this new way of looking at agriculture that is sustainable for our environment. It makes sense, so much sense. So, the fifth function then of his regenerative farming, and this is the one that Charles Massey added, and it is the human social cycle. So culturally, how we think, you know, me personally, making contact and changing the way I think. Like it blew my mind. It blew my mind that like one of the studies that he did was two farmers. Like it may have even been his brother, but yeah, I think it was. But farmers side by side, and you can see the fence line, how lush the regenerative farming landscape is and how barren the industrial farming is. And they have the economics to back up what they're doing. And yet these people won't change their minds because it's so ingrained and it's tradition. Like we are all this way. We're this way with religion. We're this way with politics. We're this way with education. It is so hard to break us out of what we've been taught and heard and our family traditions all of our lives. And that's what his PhD was on, was the way people think within this like our social constructs within this regenerative agriculture. And he calls it the mechanical mindset from the Industrial Revolution. And he thinks that we need to move past it to an emergent mindset where we're more open to these ideas. But it's all fascinating, all fascinating. I'm still thinking so much. And I will say, my mind was primed for this because I read Eating to Extinction for the BookTube Prize right before reading this. And I can't talk about that, but they dovetailed nicely for me. So one more book to mention is like, I'm still thinking, so even writing these notes, I made the connection, and with the video, the TED Talk video, which I'll link below, as well as the book titles. But Call of the Reed Warbler is this little bird that 150 years it hadn't been seen in this area. And now with regenerative farming, it's there, as well as just like hundreds of other creatures and plants that have come back to these farms that have undergone a few years of regenerative farming and are more alive again. So this little reed warbler, he's like, oh my gosh, is that a reed warbler? Like, that hasn't been heard here for 150 years. And it just clicked, you know. The title of this book is Coming from Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, which is her book that was, you know, this clarion call of warning us about industrial agriculture, like at the onset of the Green Revolution. Wait a minute, what are we doing to our planet? And we're still doing it. But this regenerative agriculture is a way to come out of that and still feed our planet and nurture it at the same time. So I think I'm going to stop gushing about this book. I hope that if you're still here, you know, it gave you some ideas. And again, I know it's not a book for everyone, but I will link those TED Talks, and maybe you can get some ideas or read one of the others. And so the Book Naturalists Book Club, May, we're reading an author spotlight. So Sonia Shaw. And I will be reading The Next Great Migration because this is the one I brought with me from the States that I had. I think I got it at a used bookstore. And Heidi has read Pandemic twice. So that must be really great. So 2 options for May. And I think she has mentioned a third in her video. So do check her video out. It is amazing. And thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back soon. Bye.